YouTube doesn't like to monetize much of my content. This content can take many days or weeks to produce. If you would like to support my work, please head over to Teespring and purchase a t-shirt, sweatshirt or sticker. Link in description. Thank you all so much. Now sit back with a drink of your choice, turn off the lights and enjoy.
It is that we embark on a program to counter the awesome Soviet missile threat with measures that are defensive. What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant U.S. retaliation to deter a Soviet attack, that we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our own soil or that of our allies? I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. My fellow Americans, tonight we're launching an effort which holds the promise of changing the course of human history. There will be risks, and results take time, but I believe we can do it. As we cross this threshold, I ask for your prayers and your support.
In the early 1980s, with the Cold War still gripping global affairs, President Ronald Reagan announced an audacious plan to protect the United States, and, by extension, its allies, from the specter of nuclear war. Officially termed the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, but quickly nicknamed Star Wars, this program aimed to deploy advanced, space-based technologies capable of intercepting and neutralizing incoming nuclear ballistic missiles. Reagan's vision called for a layered defense system that extended beyond traditional ground-based interceptors. Proposed elements ranged from orbital surveillance platforms that could detect enemy launches in real time to directed energy weapons like lasers and particle beams, theoretically able to strike warheads at tremendous distances. The sheer scale of such an undertaking demanded breakthroughs in aerospace engineering, radar and sensor development, and high-performance computer systems capable of integrating vast amounts of data. Although critics question the feasibility and astronomical costs of Star Wars, advocates saw it as a technological leap forward. Proponents argued that, if successful, it would render nuclear missiles effectively obsolete, dramatically reducing the risk of an all-out nuclear exchange with the Soviet Union. In Reagan's words, the ultimate goal was to shift global security away from mutual annihilation and toward a new era of defensive deterrence. To pursue SDI, the United States enlisted top scientists and high-tech firms worldwide. British involvement became especially important after Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher publicly endorsed the program, leading to lucrative contracts for major UK defence contractors. At the heart of these projects were gifted computer engineers, software designers, and aerospace specialists whose high-stakes work underpinned everything from orbiting laser systems to intricate radar networks, pushing the frontiers of technology and challenging the existing bounds of military science. In 1983, as the United States ramped up its Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, the ambitious Star Wars program, British defense giant Jack Marconi found itself at the epicenter of a technological revolution. Tracing its origins back to Guglielmo Marconi's pioneering radio work, the company had evolved into a global powerhouse for advanced electronics and communications. By the time Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher voiced her support for SDI, Jack Marconi was perfectly positioned to secure significant contracts from the US government. At the heart of Jack Marconi's involvement in SDI were high-stakes research projects demanding unprecedented expertise in aerospace, satellite communications, and high-performance computing. Engineers and software designers developed complex simulations to test missile targeting concepts and worked on intricate radar systems capable of detecting and tracking multiple incoming threats at once. The company collaborated with top British research institutions, including the Royal Military College of Science and other government-funded laboratories, pooling intellectual resources to deliver results on a tight timeline. Jack Marconi's researchers often traveled between the United Kingdom and the United States, forging transatlantic partnerships with American defense contractors. These close-knit teams pushed technological boundaries, from refining radar stealth detection to exploring potential laser or particle beam interceptors. Within British industry, Jack Marconi's success at attracting lucrative SDI contracts underscored its status as a vital contributor to Western defense. Yet with high-profile success came heightened scrutiny. Critics in both Britain and the US questioned whether the Star Wars program was realistic, or just a vast boondoggle siphoning taxpayer money. Allegations of overcharging and fraud began circulating in the British press, prompting investigations at the Ministry of Defence, MOD. The climate of secrecy surrounding SDI, paired with the complexity of Jack Marconi's operations, made the company a lightning rod for rumors. Members of Parliament demanded greater transparency, while anxious watchdog groups speculated about security lapses and hidden agendas. Amid this atmosphere of tension and intrigue, a series of tragic incidents cast a long shadow over Jack Marconi's achievements. Beginning in the early 1980s, a number of its most talented scientists and engineers, several of whom worked directly on top-secret SDI research, died under circumstances that defied simple explanation. Official investigations frequently pointed to suicides or accidents, but those closest to the victims often disagreed. Some deaths involved unlikely scenarios, such as high-speed car crashes in vehicles known to be meticulously maintained. In other cases, the victims were found dead with puzzling injuries or in locations they had no apparent reason to visit. Inquest rulings, meanwhile, offered scant clarity, sometimes citing insufficient evidence to determine whether foul play was involved. Despite the MOD's assertion that the tragedies were merely coincidental, the sheer number of fatalities, often clustered around key SDI projects, sparked rumors of espionage, blackmail, or covert operations. Families, friends, and co-workers challenged the notion that these well-regarded professionals, many on the cusp of promotions and brimming with future plans, would suddenly opt to end their own lives. As Jack Marconi's role in the Star Wars program continued to expand, so too did the questions surrounding the fate of its scientists. While the company pressed forward with advanced research into missile defense and surveillance technologies, an unsettling mystique grew around these unexplained deaths, an anomaly in a field already marked by strict confidentiality. What drove these tragedies remains open to debate: personal stress, illicit activity, outside interference, or forces still undisclosed. The truth behind these grim coincidences would soon become a matter of international curiosity and concern. On the morning of March 30, 1987, employees at ESAMS, a subsidiary of the prominent defense firm Marconi, began their work week anticipating business as usual. Robin, a manager at ESAMS, recalls receiving a jarring internal phone call from the company's personnel department. The message was succinct and chilling: David Sands, a close colleague, had been killed, and anyone fielding press inquiries was instructed to remain silent. After delivering this directive, the caller hung up to make similar notifications across the organization. David Sands, then 37 years old, was a senior scientist at ESAMS. He and Robin both reported to the same boss but had never worked together directly. Nonetheless, Robin was keenly aware of Sands' achievements, particularly a major contract for the British Army worth around £100 million, secured after years of rigorous studies, proposals, and negotiations. By all accounts, Sands had led the effort and was due to reap significant professional rewards. In the weeks prior, David had completed a critical phase of his work on a computer-controlled satellite radar system, part of ESAM's broader defense projects, which often intersected with high-stakes contracts from Marconi and other major military suppliers. Robin notes that Sands was held in high regard and that his imminent success should have been the start of a new, more prosperous chapter in his career. According to official reports, on that Monday morning, David Sands set out for work as he normally would. At some point along a dual carriageway, he executed a sudden U-turn and accelerated into the wall of a vacant restaurant at high speed. Estimates put the impact near 80 miles per hour. Witnesses and investigators later discovered 2 5-gallon drums of petrol in his vehicle. The subsequent explosion left the car in flames and made it impossible to identify Sands visually. Police noted there were no skid marks, suggesting he neither braked nor swerved. Though some speculated it was a deliberate act, the coroner refused to definitively label it a suicide. Instead, an open verdict acknowledged the numerous ambiguities. No persuasive motive or evidence of suicidal ideation emerged from family or friends, who insisted Sands was optimistic about his future. Company officials advised employees to say nothing to the press, fueling speculation. Leaks suggested Sands might have been under tremendous emotional strain, possibly from classified work. Yet those who knew him best, including his mother-in-law, Margaret Worth, adamantly refuted the idea of him being depressed. He had, by all accounts, been perfectly happy just a week before. Robin's recollection, shared on a personal website in October 2014, corroborates the basic facts of the accident, adding that Eames had recently all but won the massive army contract, thanks to Sands's leadership. There was no hint whatsoever that he was in turmoil, nor any sign at Eames that he might have been vulnerable to a breakdown. Some have posited more sinister explanations. During the Cold War era, speculation arose that Soviet agents could have been systematically bumping off key figures in Western defense industries, an attempt to undermine the development of advanced military technologies. According to this theory, British authorities might have kept things quiet to avoid frightening off vital defense talent. Others have floated even more elaborate ideas around hypno-programming, alleging that Sands could have been abducted, coerced, or brainwashed to commit a suicidal act, citing the lack of skid marks and presence of the gasoline cans as signs of external manipulation. Critics of this viewpoint argue it lacks concrete evidence and remains in the realm of speculation. Within Robin's reflections lies a pertinent observation. A police officer involved in the investigation supposedly remarked, "We'll probably know all the answers when the papers are released in 30 years' time." By that timeline, any hidden government files could have become public by 2017, though many suspect continued national security restrictions or gag orders might keep pertinent documents sealed far longer. Robin also highlights the possibility of searching cabinet papers in the UK National Archives, which might reveal discussions or directives about suspicious deaths in the defense sector. However, even if new documents surface, they could be heavily redacted or absent entirely, leaving the families and the public little closer to the truth. Some observers point to the Soviet war in Afghanistan, 1979 to 1989, as an indirect factor shaping the period. Western nations, including Britain, were reportedly aiding Afghan insurgents against Soviet forces, potentially raising the stakes of covert warfare and intelligence gathering. If the KGB or other hostile entities aimed to destabilize the British defense industry, targeting high-level scientists and managers like Sands might have been part of a larger strategy. Meanwhile, the British government's silence could have been a practical response to safeguarding national security. Open acknowledgement of such acts, if they were indeed covert assassinations, might have caused panic in the very field upon which the UK military relied for advanced research and development. Nearly 4 decades on, David Sands's death remains a troubling enigma. Robin, Margaret Worth, and others directly connected to the case live with lingering doubts. If it was a suicide, what could have prompted such a seemingly content and successful individual to end his life in so violent a manner? Or, if foul play was involved, how and why was it carried out so conspicuously? Those closest to Sands maintain that no truly satisfying explanation has ever emerged. While some maintain an open mind, others lean toward theories of espionage, intense workplace pressure, or experimental mind control techniques, each possibility more disquieting than the last. With the promised archival dates passed and no revelations forthcoming, the tragedy of David Sands remains a somber footnote in the broader puzzle of suspicious deaths within Britain's defense sector. For now, the public record stands as it has for decades: an open verdict, an unfinished conversation, and a family left without closure, emblematic of a time when the high stakes of Cold War-era defense research intersected with shadowy realms of secrecy and speculation.
Tires. Someone had replaced them with old and dangerous tires.
These are not the tires that would have been on the Rover. They're a different sort of tire, and you can see how badly worn they are. They're smooth, and here they're worn right down to the fabric.
That's worn completely through the tread.
Completely through.
And this wear could not have happened from the accident, from the burning of the tire?
No.
You believe this was not an accident?
No, that wasn't an accident. Got me an accident with those things on his car.
In March of 1982, Professor Keith Bowden's name reverberated through the halls of Essex University for a devastating reason. He was dead, the victim of a bizarre late-night car crash on his way home from a London social function. Bowden, 45, was no ordinary academic. He had been instrumental in co-founding the Department of Computer Sciences at Essex, where he established a reputation for brilliance in both supercomputers and computer-controlled aircraft. He was also known to have collaborated with one of England's major Star Wars contractors, tying him into the ambitious Strategic Defence Initiative, SDI, research that was capturing headlines and funds on both sides of the Atlantic. Ordinarily meticulous about his work and even more so about his personal belongings, Bowden's dedication to detail made the circumstances of his fatal car crash seem all the more perplexing. On the night of his death, he had reportedly been attending a London social function. Friends at the gathering insisted he was sober and in good spirits when he left. Later that night, Bowden supposedly lost control of his immaculately maintained Rover as he navigated across a busy 4-lane highway. Witnesses reported the car suddenly careening, jumping a bridge guardrail, and plunging into the darkness below, landing in a disused rail yard. By the time first responders reached the wreck, Bowden was dead. The initial police investigation focused on alcohol and high speed as the culprits. They claimed he had been drinking heavily and was driving recklessly. The police account portrayed a man who had been driving too fast, drunk, and apparently oblivious to danger. The coroner accepted this version of events and ruled it an accident. The case, at least officially, was closed. Behind that tidy conclusion, however, Hilary Bowden, Keith's wife, uncovered troubling details. An accident specialist hired by her solicitor confirmed that the Rover's original wheels had been replaced with a set that was conspicuously old and mismatched. Her husband was renowned for fussing over the car's upkeep, making the condition of the wheels wildly inconsistent with his usual standards. Even more unsettling were rumors about possible lab mix-ups in handling Bowden's blood alcohol tests, conflicting statements over what time he'd actually left the event, and suggestions that police investigators seemed abruptly satisfied, even when faced with unresolved oddities. Yet those who knew Keith Bowden best were reluctant to accept the official story. His wife, Hilary, insisted that her husband had not been drinking at the social gathering. Friends who had seen him earlier in the evening echoed her certainty. Bowden, they said, left entirely sober. In her shock, Hilary engaged a solicitor who hired an independent accident specialist to examine the battered Rover. The findings were disconcerting. Despite Bowden's reputation for meticulous car care, the vehicle's original wheels appeared to have been removed, replaced with a set that was dangerously old and worn. This detail would prove deeply unsettling, especially given that, at the inquest, when an official asked if the car had been in sound condition, the question was dismissed, and the answer, yes, went unchallenged. The coroner's verdict glossed over the irregularities, and in the midst of grieving, Hilary found herself unable to mount a vigorous challenge. Still, she never lost her conviction that someone had tampered with her husband's car, painting the crash as anything but a straightforward accident. The inquest allowed none of these questions to gain traction. It glossed over the tampered wheels and stood by the official statement that Bowden had been drinking. Shaken by loss, Hilary could not mount an effective protest. In the aftermath, a handful of acquaintances spoke about possible hush-hush black projects Bowden had consulted on, raising specters of national security secrecy or corporate foul play. Some of these acquaintances pointed out that documents one might expect in a high-profile or suspicious death never materialized, and that deeper scrutiny seemed stifled by what might have been legal or bureaucratic obstacles. Why thing but a straightforward accident? Unbeknownst to Hilary or the community at Essex University, Professor Keith Bowden's death would, in hindsight, become the first chapter of a disturbing saga. In the years to follow, at least 21 more British scientists, most with direct or tangential links to top-secret Star Wars research, would perish under circumstances eerily out of step with their personal histories. Some supposedly committed suicide, others succumbed to inexplicably violent accidents that defied logical explanation. Government officials routinely cited coincidence, fatigue, or extreme professional stress, but families and friends remained adamant that there was more to the story. Bowden's case introduced an unsettling pattern that would rattle the defense industry. Of how a painstakingly careful academic could suddenly drive off the road, betray his own safety standards, and fall victim to a catastrophic crash, formed the foundation for broader suspicions. In the backdrop of Cold War tensions and lucrative SDI contracts, Bowden's death began to seem less like an isolated tragedy and more like the start of an unsettling chain. Years later, Many would look back on the night his rover was found lying twisted on those abandoned tracks as the moment a dark shadow first crept into Britain's high-stakes Star Wars research scene. From that point forward, an unnerving question hovered in the air. Were these men truly victims of unfortunate fate, or had their brilliance become a target of something far more sinister? In hindsight, Professor Keith Bowden's death would be widely cited as the first in a run of at least 22 suspicious fatalities among Britain's defense scientists, many linked to the Strategic Defense Initiative. Over the next few years, men and women similarly engaged in top-secret programs died under an array of macabre circumstances, from apparently staged suicides to bizarre accidents. Authorities usually attributed these incidents to happenstance or personal stress. However, the detail about Bowden's wheels, quietly changed before that fatal drive, took on a chilling significance in subsequent discussions of espionage, defense fraud, or other conspiracies swirling around Star Wars-related work. Nearly 4 decades later, Bowden's car crash remains a hotly debated enigma. Beyond the official verdict, there lurk recollections of meticulous maintenance habits, contradictory timelines, and vanished lines of inquiry, all swirling together in a tale that exemplifies the heightened tensions of a Cold War landscape. Whether his death was merely a tragic accident or the opening act of a more sinister saga, Keith Bowden's fate carries an undeniable weight. It set the stage for a series of mysteries that would rattle Britain's defense community for years to come and leave those close to the victims, like Hillary, still certain of foul play, struggling to reconcile official answers with a mounting list of incongruities. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Godley, a 49-year-old defense expert at the prestigious Royal Military College of Science in Shrivenham, Oxfordshire, vanished without a trace in April 1983, leaving both his personal and professional circles stunned. As head of a work-study unit tasked with increasing the efficiency of the British Army, Godley commanded respect from peers and superiors alike. Not only did he hold a high-profile position within the Ministry of Defense, he was newly married to his wife, Eva, and seemingly poised for a stable future. Yet, on a routine morning, he left his married quarters to drive the half-mile to his office, and never returned. Within days, the narrative took an unsettling turn. Godley's yellow MG sports car surfaced in a car park in Folkestone, Kent, miles away from his post at Shrivenham. Inside the trunk, investigators discovered a revolver, which officials stressed was not an Army-issue weapon. They also noted a suitcase containing waterproof clothing, but found no ammunition. Despite the odd circumstances, the Ministry of Defense was quick to assert that there were no security implications tied to his disappearance. The Army's Special Investigation Branch took on the case as a matter of routine, though neither the MOD nor the press offered much explanation beyond the possibility that Godley might have suffered a sudden breakdown. In a stark contrast to this official reassurance, Godley's father, John, a 75-year-old retired magistrate's court clerk, made a public appeal through the Daily Telegraph on May 23, 1983, begging his son to call home, if only to confirm he was safe. John Godley's heartbreak ran deeper than worry alone. He had named Anthony as the principal beneficiary of his estate, a sum exceeding $79,000, worth roughly $230,000 today, on the condition that his son claim it by 1987. The Ministry of Defense officer never appeared to inherit his father's legacy, and the window lapsed with no sign of him. By April 19, 1987, newspaper articles confirmed that Anthony's share would revert to other relatives. For a time, rumors circulated that Godley's disappearance could have involved intelligence matters or hidden complexities associated with his work at the Royal Military College of Science, an institution deeply engaged in advanced research and development for the British Armed Forces. Although official statements flatly denied any link to national security, his abrupt departure, the abandoned car with a weapon in the boot, and the unclaimed inheritance left an enduring fog of unanswered questions. Far from a simple case of someone walking away from it all, his vanishing act dovetailed with a broader climate of unease. In the early to mid-1980s, several other British defense specialists, some tied to top-secret projects under the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative, were reported dead or missing under baffling circumstances. While authorities generally cited stress, psychological strain, or coincidence, family members and colleagues couldn't help but note the rising count of tragedies that seemed anything but routine. Nearly 4 decades on, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Godley remains unaccounted for. No definitive proof has surfaced to clarify what truly happened in April 1983, leaving a space in both his personal and professional circles that can never be fully explained. In the official record, His story concludes with a missing persons file and a quiet statement from the Ministry of Defense denying any deeper significance. Unofficially, however, the disappearance of a senior mod officer, who once drove off to work one ordinary morning, continues to underscore the perplexing realm where high-stakes defense research and private life intersect, and where, sometimes, not even those closest to the missing can find a way to bring them home. Little is documented about the daily life and career of Rodger Hill, other than that he was 49 years old, a radar designer and draftsman, and employed at Marconi, the iconic British defense electronics company, during the mid-1980s. By the time he made it onto official records and later, conspiracy rosters, it was because of one fatal event in March 1985. Hill reportedly died by suicide, using a shotgun, in his own home. One of the few elements to surface from friends and co-workers is that Hill had a methodical approach to his work. He was known for fine detailed drafting skills, critical to radar development and design in a company deeply involved in secretive projects. At Marconi, radar technology fed into sophisticated military applications and sometimes touched upon the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, also known as Star Wars. Those who knew Hill speak only briefly of a quiet, unassuming man whose day-to-day routine seemed steady, almost too ordinary to end so tragically. Rodger Hill's story, like that of several others, often appears alongside a list of lesser-known Marconi tragedies, engineers, technicians, or defense specialists who did not command as many headlines as some of their higher-profile counterparts. In this sense, he disappears into the background of a much larger narrative. As with other scientists in the Marconi orbit, Rodger Hill's death was officially ruled a suicide, with no apparent evidence of foul play. Yet the climate of uncertainty made his tragic end one more piece in an unsettling puzzle. Because Hill's name is frequently mentioned only in passing, rarely the centerpiece of an in-depth investigation, his case exemplifies how some Marconi fatalities gained minimal exposure. While the media occasionally pointed to intense work pressure or unknown personal crises, official agencies seldom released additional information. Family members and close friends were left without the time or resources to challenge the coroner's verdict. This dearth of public scrutiny helped cement Hill's place on the fringe of the Marconi mystery. He became part of the footnotes, a name in a grim roll call of sudden deaths. Over the years, conspiracy theorists have woven Rodger Hill into more dramatic stories of covert murders or intelligence operations, though few, if any, direct links have ever been substantiated. It remains unclear whether he worked specifically on technologies that might have compromised national security or threatened a clandestine network. Nonetheless, the mere fact that he had specialized knowledge, kept a low profile, and died in unsettling circumstances sufficed for his inclusion on various suspicious deaths lists. Like several other Marconi employees who died under questionable or little understood circumstances, Rodger Hill's death might, on its own, have been forgotten as a private tragedy. But coupled with other cases from the same period, some involving leaps from bridges, violent car crashes, or asphyxiation in locked garages, it contributed to a broader storyline. Official channels repeatedly chalked these incidents up to coincidences, mental health issues, or unconnected personal struggles, while more ominous theories of espionage, blackmail, or contract-related cover-ups proliferated in the background. Amid the speculation, Rodger Hill's name remains pinned to the collective memory as one of the lesser-known scientists who, despite playing crucial, if behind-the-scenes, roles at Marconi, did not live to see their work come to fruition. Little emerged about the precise radar projects to which he contributed, or whether his expertise might have been sought by competing interests or foreign powers. Without further evidence, official or otherwise, his story continues to hover between rumor and tragedy, forever entangled in a web of unverified claims that define the Marconi mysteries of the 1980s. Even decades later, the details surrounding Rodger Hill's final day remain sparse, leaving his family and a handful of acquaintances with few clear answers. As with so many other Marconi deaths, his suicide is relegated to a short file note in coroner's records, overshadowed by a swirl of speculation that can't be resolved by the fragments of information available. Though rarely a focal point, Rodger Hill's case adds another dimension to the overarching question: why did so many highly skilled individuals linked to top-level defense work die unexpectedly during a single era? In the absence of definitive proof, historians and observers alike are left to wonder whether Hill's death was simply the tragic outcome of personal desperation, or if it belonged to an intricate chain of incidents that still defies neat explanation. For now, with his life and final moments so faintly chronicled, Rodger Hill endures in memory as both an individual tragedy and a footnote in a larger, unresolved narrative. In November 1985, 29-year-old Johnathan Walsh, an accomplished expert in digital communications, arrived in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, on assignment from British Telecom. His high-level role tied him to the company's secret Martlesham Heath research facility, a hub for cutting-edge communications technology, and potentially to JEC, parent company of the high-profile defense contractor Marconi. Not long after settling into a local hotel, Walsh expressed a chilling concern. He feared for his life. Few specifics exist about what Walsh was doing in the Ivory Coast. Some suspect he was testing or installing secure communication systems for a government or corporate client. Others believe his presence there was linked to hush-hush projects akin to those carried out by fellow Marconi engineers back in Britain, especially since his skill set aligned with advanced digital systems, encryption, and high-stakes data handling. Walsh was found dead after an apparent fall from his hotel room in Abidjan. The situation immediately sparked questions. Investigators who arrived on the scene were faced with conflicting possibilities. Was this suicide, accident, or foul play? Local authorities in the Ivory Coast provided only minimal details, and British Telecom's official statements were similarly sparse. Although the coroner did not issue a straightforward suicide verdict, the cause of death remained ambiguous, leaving Walsh's relatives, friends, and any interested onlookers with no solid resolution. What deepened the sense of mystery was Walsh's prior declaration of feeling endangered. People who knew him commented that he had reported unusual pressures related to his work, or that he had sensed he was being followed. Others claim he was wary of sharing too many details about his assignment, fearing it could compromise him even further. If Walsh did indeed harbor these concerns, it made his sudden death all the more disturbing. While Johnathan Walsh worked primarily for British Telecom, his connection to JEC, Marconi's parent firm, raises immediate parallels to the so-called Marconi deaths of the 1980s, a spate of unexplained fatalities among scientists, engineers, and technicians involved in top-secret or specialized defense research. Most of these individuals, whether from Marconi directly or from affiliated establishments, were considered vital contributors to advanced weapons, radar, and computing projects. Some had links to the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, also known as Star Wars. Within this broader pattern, Walsh's case stands out for its international dimension. In many of the other incidents, the victims died on British soil, often amid suspicious circumstances that authorities labeled as suicide or freak accidents. Walsh's death in West Africa broke that pattern geographically, yet it shared the same abruptness, the same overshadowing swirl of unanswered questions, and the same improbable link back to Britain's defense and communications sector. Lacking an official narrative beyond the bare-bones facts of a fatal fall, conspiracy theorists and casual observers alike have woven Johnathan Walsh's final days into layered hypotheses. Some point to possible espionage, contending that Walsh may have discovered sensitive material or was being pressured to divulge secrets. Others suggest an internal rift, perhaps connected to fraudulent billing practices or illegal arms deals, where a whistleblower could be silenced under the guise of a tragic accident. Rumors also persist that corporate or government actors rushed to close the case quietly, limiting further scrutiny. The MOD, Ministry of Defense, and British Telecom have never publicly acknowledged Walsh's death as anything other than a private misfortune, typically citing stress or inconclusive circumstances. Yet the secrecy around Martlesham Heath, which remained classified for numerous ongoing defense contracts, added layers of intrigue. People wondered, if an employee with privileged access to advanced communications research openly feared for his life, why did no one ensure his protection? Like the events surrounding numerous other British scientists covered so far, Johnathan Walsh's story remains overshadowed by official reticence and scant documentation. How precisely did a promising communications expert, on the cusp of new discoveries, end up on the wrong side of a hotel window in West Africa? And if he truly sensed mortal danger, from whom or what was he running? Decades later, the final verdict is, in a literal sense, still in question. No direct evidence surfaced to confirm or refute conspiracy scenarios, but the vacuum left by silence and perplexing circumstances keeps his name afloat in discussions of the Marconi deaths. There is something undeniably haunting about an engineer whose professional work demanded secrecy, whose personal anxieties hinted at unseen threats, and whose last breath came far from home in a fall that may or may not have been his own doing. What remains are the echoes of Johnathan Walsh's life and career, a brilliant but undersung role in Britain's digital communications scene, an abrupt and violent end, and the unnerving possibility that his demise was neither random nor explained. Whether his fate was purely coincidental or yet another piece in a puzzle that still mystifies investigators, Walsh's story underscores the fragile line between confidential research and a sudden, irreversible plunge into the unknown. From the moment he first tinkered with circuit boards, 24-year-old electronics engineer Vimal Dajibhai had shown a natural affinity for the intricacies of technology. Colleagues and friends described him as inquisitive and meticulous, a bright mind poised to excel within Britain's high-tech research arena of the 1980s. Though never officially confirmed as a Marconi employee, Dajibhai's name still appears alongside those of other young defense specialists rumored to be entangled in sensitive work. In August 1986, however, the promise of his future ended violently when Bristol authorities discovered his body 240 feet below the Clifton suspension bridge. A snippet from the Bristol Evening Post referred to the fall as tragic and unexplained, and the subsequent coroner's inquest registered an open verdict. Without conclusive proof of suicide or homicide, the case stagnated. Investigative columns in Computer News later vented frustration that there had been no evidence to confirm one way or the other whether he had jumped or been pushed. Early coverage showcased the tragedy's stark contradictions. Interviews quoted by the Sunday Mirror painted Dajibhai as high-spirited, someone not the type to take impulsive risks. He was, by nature, a systematic thinker, rarely inclined to rash decisions. Compounding these doubts, a police report noted an unusual puncture wound on his body. Tabloids such as the Daily Express began speculating that he might have been drugged before his fall. Yet within months, the authorities dismissed this lead, labeling the wound a byproduct of impact trauma. According to journalist Tony Collins, who tracked a series of suspicious scientist deaths, no thorough analysis of the injury ever took place, a procedural gap that fueled countless rumors on Cold War-era internet forums. Despite the public's lingering unease, no outlet focused a full-scale investigation solely on Dajibhai, in part due to the overshadowing nature of other high-profile deaths among British defense researchers. The sum of scattered press reports, however, revealed a disturbing pattern. Why would a gifted engineer with a passion for complex systems, described by friends as happy and driven, die so abruptly beneath a landmark bridge? And why shelve the one potential clue, a puncture wound, so readily? A handful of follow-up stories allude to Dajibhai's family expressing skepticism over the open verdict. Some tabloids even hinted at subtle intimidation tactics meant to quash deeper inquiries, although these accusations remain unverified. Still, the event's chilling details echo in any conversation about what came to be called the Marconi deaths, a series of baffling incidents in which defense-linked specialists met violent or inexplicable ends. Over the years, Dajibhai's youth and unassuming brilliance have come to symbolize the hidden toll of secrecy and suspicion at the juncture of national security research. The Independent and the Sunday Times sometimes cite him in broader exposés, lumping his name with other ill-fated engineers rumored to be connected to high-level defense projects, including the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI. While his actual affiliation remains inconclusive, the mere suggestion that his talents could have overlapped with classified work keeps his story alive in discussions about espionage and the quiet dangers of cutting-edge research. Today, the circumstances of his death still linger in the public's imagination: an inexplicable plunge, an unexamined wound, and a silence that fell over the investigation almost as soon as it began. For those who suspect foul play, he is yet another shadowy figure in a chain of tragedies. For others, he is a stark reminder that a single moment, or a single missing piece of evidence, can cast a permanent pall over a brilliant career. Ultimately, the mystery of Vimal Dajibhai endures as both a testament to the cost of secrecy and a haunting question mark in Britain's defense history. At the time of his death in October 1986, 26-year-old Ashad Sharif was already paving the way for an impressive career as a computer analyst at Marconi Defense Systems. Friends and colleagues describe a quiet but dedicated individual, someone on the edge of promotion thanks to his skill with complex software and data projects. In Bristol, where he shared accommodations, Sharif seemed to be settling into a steady rhythm, He had begun cultivating relationships within the local community and was tentatively establishing himself among Marconi's younger engineers. Some accounts even place him in overlapping social circles with Vimal Dajibhai, an electronics engineer who had died 2 months prior under equally puzzling circumstances. Whether their roles ever truly intersected remains speculative, but it paints the picture of a closely knit cohort of rising professionals in Britain's defense sector. Late that October, a passerby in a public park stumbled onto a harrowing scene. Sharif's Audi, reported to be an 80 automatic, was still running, while one end of a rope encircled a stout tree trunk and the other end wrapped around Sharif's neck. In the silence following an apparent moment of high-speed acceleration, the engine rumbled ominously, emphasizing the nightmarish discovery. Emergency responders, grappling with the immediacy of such a gruesome death, quickly brought in the local coroner's office, and discussions of sides surfaced almost immediately. Yet the stark violence and methodical nature of the act, tying a rope to a stationary object and then driving forward, prompted unease among officials and onlookers alike. According to early reports, police cordoned off the area to piece together Sharif's last known movements, but the narrative soon became tangled with conflicting theories. Initially, local authorities suggested romantic turmoil. Sharif may have been distraught over a broken affair or pressured to end an existing engagement in Pakistan. Yet, as the days passed, family members rejected these claims, and a woman said to be his lover denied any intimacy, stating she was merely his former landlady. Meanwhile, murmurings of a taped message found in Sharif's vehicle drifted through the press. Police declared it was tantamount to a side note, while relatives who heard it personally said the tape was too vague to confirm any motive, certainly not a dramatic catalyst for self-destruction. Amid such confusion, the police narrative seemed to shift. First, they claimed heartbreak had driven Sharif to desperation. Then they suggested he was panicked about a marriage and felt pressured by someone else entirely. Each version conflicted with the observations of friends and associates who insisted Sharif was neither impulsive nor prone to rash decisions. The method of death itself, tying a rope to a tree and accelerating, required a disturbing degree of determination or, as some feared, possible coercion. Skeptics wondered whether another party had orchestrated the entire scene, yet investigators found no direct evidence of foul play. Even so, the lingering doubt reflected the reality that any reflexive action, like touching the brakes, could have prevented the rope from tightening so mercilessly. The coroner's verdict emerged swiftly: side. Records from the inquest point to emotional distress as the central factor, bolstered by inconsistent accounts and rumors of heartbreak. Family members were left incredulous, highlighting Sharif's career achievements, calm disposition, and plans for the future. They pointed to the unresolved questions surrounding the alleged taped message. Why hadn't its contents been more thoroughly disclosed? Why had the police's official explanation changed more than once? No conclusive forensic evidence indicated intoxicants or a struggle, making Sharif's death appear, at least procedurally, to be an isolated act of self-harm. Still, those who knew him were shaken by the discord between the official conclusion and the bizarre practicalities of the case. Friends wondered why Sharif would adopt such a shockingly meticulous approach if his despondency was truly rooted in romantic or personal woes. Others quietly questioned whether external pressures linked to work or high-tech projects might have played a role. After all, Sharif moved in the same broad orbit as other young defense workers who died under clouded circumstances in the mid-1980s. No proof emerged to connect these tragedies, but the timing and violent nature of each incident kept speculation alive. As the years passed, the story of Ashad Sharif would be overshadowed by broader attention to Marconi deaths, those mysterious or unsettling fatalities rumored to involve engineers tied to sensitive research. Nonetheless, the grim details of Sharif's final moments stand out even among those cases. He remains, for some, a sign of how quickly official conclusions can be reached when the clues are conflicting and the witnesses hold divergent accounts. For others, he is a tragic figure whose memory lingers as part of Britain's unsettled defense history, hinting that perhaps his death was not so straightforward after all. Almost 4 decades later, no additional evidence has surfaced to challenge the coroner's final ruling. And yet the unsettling questions remain. Was this really a desperate act of a distraught young man, someone who, by most measures, had everything to live for? Or did dark forces or hidden motives intersect with Sharif's life in ways that remain invisible to the public record? Without further evidence or a reopened investigation, Sharif's death stands as a cautionary tale about how swiftly a seemingly inexplicable tragedy can be consigned to the label of side. However one interprets that October day, his final act reverberates across time, a haunting reminder that the truth may lie in the shadows beyond our grasp. For most who knew him, Richard Pugh epitomized the quiet precision of a Ministry of Defense consultant. His work demanded both technical prowess and unwavering discretion, two qualities he seemed to possess in abundance. Few, if any, saw more than the polished exterior, a methodical professional capable of navigating large-scale systems, coding projects, and the hush-hush environment of defense contracting. And if he ever felt the strain of such responsibilities, those closest to him never glimpsed it. Yet, in January 1987, the promise of Pugh's steady world snapped under disturbing circumstances. He was found dead, wrapped from head to toe in rope, the strands tied 4 times around his neck. Onlookers found no signs of a struggle, the furniture remained undisturbed, the door showed no forced entry, and preliminary forensics revealed no other person's presence at the scene. The coroner, pointing to existing precedents for fatal, solitary breath control practices, listed the cause of death as a sexual experiment gone awry. In some respects, this explanation seems straightforward. Autoerotic asphyxiation has claimed lives in similarly confounding ways. Yet those who had relied on Pugh's meticulous approach to problem-solving found it difficult to accept he would embark on such a dangerous pastime. They recalled him as rigidly orderly, inclined to weigh risks at every turn. Could he really have chosen a method that so glaringly contradicted his measured persona? The official narrative left little room for alternatives. The authorities cited no forced entry, no sabotage, and no reason to doubt the coroner's verdict. Yet in whispered conversations and short-lived press mentions, acquaintances voiced misgivings. Was there more to the story, especially given the heightened secrecy of Pugh's field? A swirl of rumors speculated on whether he might have possessed sensitive knowledge, or if someone, somewhere, had orchestrated his final moments to mask a more sinister act. Nothing concrete ever materialized, no blackmail notes, no hidden documents, no breakthroughs that might shadow the lone accident account. Still, the image of rope wound 4 times around the neck lingered as an unsettling detail. Experts in such misadventures note that ligatures can be common in cases of erotic asphyxiation, but multiple wrappings can appear excessive. The coroner's explanation, a complex sexual scenario, didn't sit well with those searching for a rational motive behind Pugh's fatal choice. If he was, in fact, engaged in this secret practice, did anyone close to him suspect even the slightest sign of it? Unlike some high-profile defense sector fatalities that year, Pugh's death passed relatively quickly through the headlines. Its sexual nature may have contributed to the subdued coverage. The story lacked the sensational draw or public curiosity that sometimes accompanies more overtly suspicious events. Without family members challenging the verdict in court, and with no reinvestigation, the narrative crystallized around a single, discomforting truth, that an apparently controlled, diligent consultant had chosen a risky private behavior that ended his life. Within certain circles, particularly those already uneasy about the broader rash of defense-related deaths during the 1980s, Pugh's demise remained an unsettling footnote. Despite the coroner's firm declaration of no foul play, some could not wholly banish the possibility that his knowledge or access made him vulnerable. Could his death have been staged, its very outlandishness cloaking a deeper plot? Nothing surfaced to support this notion, leaving only speculation. Ultimately, Richard Pugh's death stands as a rare, jarring intersection between rigid order and sudden chaos. By day, he toiled as a linchpin in sophisticated mod computing tasks. By night, if the official account holds, he ventured into perilous experimentation that ran contrary to everything colleagues believed they knew about him. The contradiction is stark and remains unresolved, sealed by an official verdict that pronounces an accidental tragedy in a self-made scenario. With no further evidence forthcoming and no relatives pushing for a reinvestigation, Pugh's final chapter stays frozen in the annals of British defense mysteries. More than 3 decades later, his story resurfaces sporadically, a cautionary tale on how even the most disciplined lives can harbor unknowable depths, and how swiftly the unusual can become the accepted truth when all dissenting clues fade into silence. John Brittain was known around the Royal Military College of Science, RMCS, as a diligent engineer with an unusual focus, the technology behind tank batteries. Meticulous about protocol and fascinated by complex power systems, he relished the kind of work that demanded patience and precision. His colleagues at the Ministry of Defense viewed him as reserved, someone more comfortable in a research lab than in the spotlight, yet they also trusted his quiet dedication to protecting the viability of modern armored vehicles. In January 1987, however, a grim discovery shattered that image. Brittain was found inside his parked car, the engine still running, in the garage of his Oxfordshire home. Neighbors or family members stumbled upon the scene, sensing something amiss when they realized the car had been running long enough to fill the closed space with exhaust fumes. Emergency responders noted classic signs of carbon monoxide poisoning. There was no forced entry, no distress calls, and apparently no struggle. Police quickly set about evaluating the car's condition and Britton's recent behavior. Early speculation suggested he might have merely started the vehicle for a routine reason and succumbed to the fumes before noticing the danger. Given Britton's background in defense work, some observers found it hard to believe that a trained engineer, so attuned to safety measures, would fail to recognize the lethal risk of a running engine in an enclosed area. Yet no evidence indicated any alternative cause. Investigators, citing the absence of suspicious injuries or any hint of side, leaned toward an accidental verdict. The coroner's office agreed, labeling Britton's death an inadvertent mishap, an unlucky convergence of a closed garage and toxic exhaust gases. Despite the unsettling questions left behind, official statements never wavered. This was a routine act that turned tragically fatal. Co-workers later expressed mild disbelief at the notion that Britton, methodical about even the smallest details, could overlook such a hazard. Still, none reported seeing signs of personal turmoil or unusual stress in the weeks prior to his death, making a deliberate act seem equally implausible. And in the climate of early 1987, when other defense-related incidents raised speculation of foul play, Britton's death bore few of the hallmarks shared by those more violent or cryptic cases. Authorities thus saw no cause to press further. In the end, Britton's name never became a media fixture. His passing, if noted, was overshadowed by more publicized events in the defense sphere. Colleagues at RMCS grieved for a quiet technician whose day-to-day life centered on meticulous problem-solving, and whose final moments, paradoxically, appear to have involved a lapse in basic caution. Without conclusive evidence of anything else at play, friends and family are left to reconcile the official account with the lingering sense that something so obviously dangerous could only happen when one's guard is unexpectedly down. John Britton is remembered as a man committed to the nuanced work of sustaining tank batteries, a job that, like all mod projects, required unflagging awareness of operational risks. That background makes his accidental death no less puzzling, especially in a setting where hazard warnings and safety checks are part of the daily routine. Yet the coroner's ruling stands, a singular misjudgment leading to tragic consequences. In a profession built on caution, Britton's demise highlights an unsettling truth. Even the most thorough habits can falter in a single, fateful moment. Victor Moore, a 46-year-old design engineer at Marconi Space Systems, was by most accounts an unassuming professional who thrived amid the challenges of satellites, propulsion concepts, and other aerospace innovations. Colleagues recall him as methodical and cool under pressure, content to work long hours if it meant refining the technical complexities of a project. In a field where breakthroughs often required secrecy and unrelenting attention to detail, Moore appeared to fit neatly into his role. That impression came under grim scrutiny in February 1987, when he was discovered dead of a drug overdose. Early news reports, terse but direct, labeled his death a suicide. According to brief mentions in local outlets like the Bristol Evening Post and the Daily Mirror, investigators found signs that Moore had intentionally ingested a lethal dose of medication, likely prescription drugs, though the specifics never appeared in public accounts. Deeming the scene straightforward, authorities concluded there was insufficient evidence to suspect foul play. In a year marked by a cluster of Marconi-related fatalities, Moore's demise seemed less bizarre than some of the more violent or unexplained deaths and thus attracted limited investigative fervor. Still, the verdict surprised those who knew Moore personally. He had shown no obvious signs of distress at work, where he had recently finalized a noteworthy design project, nor had he confided in friends about personal turmoil. For a few weeks, local papers and national publications grouping Marconi deaths together noted his passing as one more unsettling entry in the tally of specialists found dead under suspicious or sudden circumstances. But his overdose did not resonate with the same shock value as reports of hangings, rope decapitations, or unexplained accidents, and media attention soon drifted elsewhere. Yet rumors and questions lingered, particularly among those who saw Moore as a steadfast figure, unlikely to crumble under industry pressures. Had he been grappling with an undisclosed illness? Could undisclosed professional obligations or security demands have weighed on him more heavily than anyone realized? Though Marconi's line of work could be punishing, official sources offered nothing to suggest Moore had been entangled in espionage or blackmail. Beyond the bare fact of his side, the specifics of what led him to overdose remained elusive. If he left a note, it was never publicly acknowledged, and the coroner's ruling held firmly to the simplest explanation: personal despair or hidden troubles that pushed him to a final, drastic act. No inquest findings emerged to fill those gaps, leaving co-workers and family members to wrestle with the discrepancy between the focused engineer they knew and a man who would abruptly end his life through such a method. Some wondered whether his quiet disposition masked deeper anxieties, others, that perhaps he felt cornered by private health or emotional factors. Without concrete evidence, these theories remained speculative, eventually receding from headlines. Decades later, Victor Moore's death stands as another footnote in the era's wave of Marconi and defense-related tragedies. Though less outwardly dramatic than many, it underscores a simple, troubling truth: no level of professional competence or external calm can fully reveal the private struggles a person carries. As curiosity about those Marconi deaths resurfaces from time to time, Moore's case lingers in memory, a reminder that even those who seem firmly in control might harbor burdens that end in tragedy, with the rest of the story locked away where no final answers can reach. By early 1987, 46-year-old scientist Peter People had already earned respect at the Royal Military College of Science, RMCS, in Oxfordshire, where he specialized in research with potential ties to defense projects. Colleagues described him as both measured and observant, a professional who demanded rigorous experimentation and meticulous detail. He was family-oriented, outwardly calm, and rarely gave any hint of personal or financial strain. That poise made the circumstances of his sudden death all the more perplexing. In February of that year, People's wife found him beneath his car in their garage, his face near the tailpipe. Tests suggested the engine had run only briefly, but even that short time appeared sufficient for carbon monoxide poisoning to claim his life. At first, it seemed to be a tragic side. After all, his body lay within easy reach of toxic fumes. Yet almost immediately, certain details drew scrutiny. Those who knew him saw no sign of despondency or distress. Additionally, the short runtime of the engine hardly squared with a conventional scenario of intentionally inhaling exhaust. It was possible he had been investigating a mechanical issue or fixing a stray noise when carbon monoxide overwhelmed him, or so friends theorized. Still, the notion of foul play has never been formally dismissed. Some investigators found it odd that People, a methodical scientist, would crawl under a running vehicle without more careful precautions, while others pointed out that if someone had incapacitated him beforehand, placing him in that precarious spot was a neat way to stage an apparent side. With no forced entry, no sign of a struggle, and no direct evidence of homicide, the official stance leaned toward an accidental or self-inflicted death. Yet in the larger realm of 1980s defense sector mysteries, People's case has often been noted for its loose ends. Newspapers that occasionally listed unexplained scientist deaths highlighted People's name, drawing attention to the incongruities: his stable personal life, the truncated engine operation, the absence of any clear motive for self-harm. Though authorities conducted interviews, reviewed the garage for clues, and performed a post-mortem confirming carbon monoxide as the cause, nothing conclusively showed he intended to end his life. Some acquaintances believe he died in a freak accident. Perhaps he was tinkering with the car and got caught in a lethal situation. Others suspect a more sinister explanation, given the broader context of sudden and suspicious losses among British defense researchers. All these years later, Peter People remains an enigma. His colleagues at RMCS recall a dedicated scientist, thoughtful and exacting. Yet the conditions of his death have left behind a puzzle no subsequent forensics has resolved. As with several other high-tech or defense-linked fatalities in that era, the case stands at the crossroads of multiple theories: accident, side, or even potential foul play, and the evidence offers only ambiguity. Without fresh investigation or emergent proof, the full truth behind People's final moments appears fated to remain an open question. Edwin Skeels was 43, an engineer employed at Marconi and known for his methodical approach to every project he touched. His colleagues admired how he handled the intricate demands of a high-stakes defense contractor, where tight deadlines and confidentiality agreements often amplified the everyday pressures of technical work. Yet beneath that steady, capable exterior, few could guess at the troubles that led him to a lonely end in February 1987. When authorities discovered Skeels's lifeless body inside his car, they found a makeshift hose routing exhaust fumes into the vehicle's interior. The engine was still running, trapping carbon monoxide in the sealed cabin, a deliberate setup that quickly overwhelmed him. Investigators saw no sign of third-party involvement. The conclusion seemed inescapable: he had taken meticulous steps to end his own life. Friends and family struggled to reconcile this grim scene with the image of a skilled engineer whose calm demeanor rarely hinted at personal distress. True, engineering in a defense environment can carry hidden layers of stress, especially under classified conditions where people learn not to share their burdens. But for many who knew him, the idea of Skeels quietly succumbing to despair defied expectations. Some speculated about an undisclosed personal crisis, financial troubles, perhaps, or emotional turmoil that never reached the surface. Others floated the possibility that the relentless obligations of Marconi's projects might have weighed more heavily on him than anyone realized. Still, no substantial clues emerged to challenge the coroner's verdict of side. Once the final report released its stark conclusion, carbon monoxide poisoning via intentional setup, officials considered the matter closed. In the flurry of 1980s incidents that came to be known informally as the Marconi deaths, Skeels's tragedy did not stand out for any particularly violent or puzzling details. Yet in quiet corners, his death added one more unsettling data point to the growing tally of defense sector professionals who had met early, harrowing ends. For those searching for patterns or conspiracies, Skeels's death may read as a sorrowful example of just how opaque a person's private struggles can be. For others, it remains a stark reminder that no one, however technically proficient or outwardly composed, is automatically shielded from despair. Ultimately, the memory of Edwin Skeels lingers as both an emblem of an overburdened industry and a deeply personal tragedy, reminding us that behind every capable facade, unseen battles may rage unchecked. At just 23 years old, Stuart Gooding stood at the threshold of a promising career. A postgraduate research student at the Royal Military College of Science, RMCS, he was often described as bright, curious, and deeply engaged in the sophisticated fields that mesh scientific inquiry with defense objectives. It was no surprise that he chose RMCS, an institution known for training some of Britain's most capable minds in military technology and strategy. Although precise details of Gooding's research remain scarce, those who worked alongside him recall his enthusiasm for applied science and the sense that he was on the cusp of something significant. In April 1987, this budding trajectory came to a devastating halt on the island of Cyprus, where RMCS was reportedly hosting or observing military exercises. Gooding had traveled there, perhaps for research, training, or an observational role, to experience firsthand the practical side of what he studied in the lecture halls and labs back in England. By most accounts, he was fit, focused, and ready to absorb the lessons such an environment could provide. Yet something went catastrophically wrong. Local authorities responding to a wrecked vehicle found that Gooding had died in a car accident. Reports at the time, though sparse, noted that his car either overturned or veered off the road under unclear circumstances. The official conclusion was swift and unambiguous: accidental death. With no glaring signs of foul play, investigators assumed he had lost control of the vehicle or encountered a sudden problem on the roadway. No in-depth inquest or follow-up probe seems to have followed that initial verdict, leaving those close to Gooding with more questions than answers. Back in Britain, his friends and associates received the news with shock. Gooding had been known for his caution and his immersion in the regulated, methodical environment of RMCS, a place where military exercises typically adhered to strict protocols, and where personal travel in the midst of these operations was supposed to be equally measured. How could such a dedicated, detail-oriented student fall victim to a fatal driving mishap? Absent an official investigation, rumors sprouted. Was there a mechanical failure? A misunderstanding of local roads? Or could there have been a more sinister dimension that official statements glossed over? Despite these whisperings, the media spotlight lingered on the story only briefly. A handful of British newspapers picked up on the tragedy, but they offered few insights beyond the simple accident label. Cypriot authorities didn't release much information, and RMCS itself, bound by Ministry of Defense confidentiality, remained tight-lipped. With no public inquest to clarify events, speculation about Gooding's final journey never transcended the realm of rumor. For Gooding's family, friends, and academic mentors, the sudden loss of a rising star in the defense research community felt like a riddle without a satisfying solution. The official stance, an accident, end of story, offered scant reassurance. In the years since, Stuart Gooding's name occasionally resurfaces in discussions of unexplained or mysterious defense-related fatalities from that period. Much like others who died under murky circumstances, his case hints at a gap between official narratives and the lingering uncertainty felt by those closest to the deceased. a bright future, cut short in an overseas crash that no one seems able, or willing, to fully explain, stands as a sobering reminder of how easily such promise can be lost without meaningful resolution. When George Countess joined the computing team at a British polytechnic in the mid-1980s, he quickly earned a reputation as a gifted systems analyst. Colleagues praised his skill at turning abstract technical concepts into workable solutions, and the institution soon came to rely on his thoughtful, measured approach to tackling large-scale projects. Friends recalled him as approachable and level-headed, traits that balanced out his deep academic curiosity with the practical demands of managing databases and software architectures for students and faculty alike. In April 1987, however, all those calm, methodical qualities seemed to vanish in one tragic moment. Countess's BMW plunged into the Mersey River in Liverpool, leading to his eventual drowning. The few published reports did little more than call it a mysterious accident. By the time rescue efforts reached him, it was already too late. Authorities attributed his death to misadventure, implying that some unforeseen mishap, a subtle turn of the wheel, a slick patch of road, or simply a moment's lapse, had caused the car to veer into the water. Despite the finality of the coroner's conclusion, uneasy questions persisted. Those who knew Countess found it hard to reconcile a catastrophic crash with the calm, analytical professional they'd worked with. Had a medical emergency robbed him of control at a crucial instant? Did his vehicle suffer a sudden mechanical failure? The official record provided no further insight. Local news moved on once the misadventure label stuck. Still, the very nature of Countess's work, rooted in logic, troubleshooting, and meticulous planning, made the turn of events feel doubly bizarre. One might imagine he'd be exactly the type to navigate around dangerous roads or faulty car issues. Could hidden personal struggles or simple fatigue have played a role? Or did a quirk of the Mersey's surrounding infrastructure conspire to make a minor miscalculation lethal? In the weeks that followed, the Polytechnic offered subdued tributes to a beloved colleague whose passing seemed altogether out of character. No further inquiries challenged the coroner's verdict. And so, George Countess, remembered for his knack for precision and calm demeanor, quietly joined the list of defense-oriented or academically affiliated professionals whose deaths in the 1980s continue to spark unanswered what-ifs. Whether a heartbreaking accident or a matter overshadowed by missed details, his fate in the Mersey River stands as a reminder of how abruptly certainty can falter, even for someone whose life revolved around method and caution. At just 24 years old, Mark Wisner was emerging as a standout software engineer at a Ministry of Defense experimental station dedicated to combat aircraft research. Known for his precision and ability to wrangle complex code, he seemed built for the demanding environment of secret prototypes and pressing development schedules. Yet in April 1987, the promise of his career ended under circumstances few could have foreseen. He was found dead in his home, a plastic bag over his head. Investigators examining the scene encountered no forced entry, no ransacked furniture, only small, telling details suggesting something other than side or foul play. While a plastic bag placed over the head often implies a determined act, the evidence led officials to consider an accident. During the coroner's inquest, the final account pointed to a sexual experiment gone awry, specifically an ill-fated case of autoerotic asphyxiation. Such a practice involves restricting oxygen to intensify arousal, tragically dangerous if miscalculated even slightly. Friends and co-workers reeled at the news. The Mark Wisner they knew appeared calm and meticulous, a problem solver, not someone prone to extreme private behaviors. They found it difficult to mesh the rational professional with the scenario of a risky act capable of spiraling out of control in mere moments. Whispered speculation surfaced regarding hidden pressures, high clearance responsibilities, looming deadlines, or the intangible stresses that come with cutting-edge defense work. Still, no evidence ever emerged to confirm that these factors drove him to experiment in such a perilous way. Ultimately, the coroner declared Wisner's death an accident, a solitary exploration gone fatally wrong. The Ministry of Defense made no public statement beyond acknowledging the official verdict, leaving those who knew Wisner to wrestle with their quiet disbelief. Even as the file was closed, the questions lingered. How could a disciplined mind misjudge the risk so drastically? And if unspoken burdens played any part, why had he chosen so dangerous an outlet? With no contradictory clues to reopen the case, the final chapter of Mark Wisner's life remained sealed by an unsettling truth, that beneath a disciplined exterior may lie impulses and uncertainties invisible to co-workers and friends alike. His tragic end, rooted in an intensely private act, offers a sobering reminder of how swiftly a life can unravel behind closed doors, even for those who appear most in control. Michael Baker was only 22 when colleagues at Plessy Defense Systems began to notice his remarkable knack for digital communications. Even in a Cold War landscape that demanded secrecy and precision, Baker stood out, calmly troubleshooting encrypted protocols, refining network security frameworks, and absorbing the demands of cutting-edge defense projects. By most accounts, he was poised for bigger responsibilities and quietly looking forward to tackling them head-on. In May 1987, however, that promise ended in a harrowing instant. Baker's BMW careened through a road barrier, ultimately flipping or rolling with enough force to claim his life at the scene. Early reports suggested he'd been on a routine drive, perhaps running a simple errand. Investigators, sifting through the wreckage, found no signs of foul play or mechanical tampering. No second vehicle seemed to be involved, and the collision site, thought to be near a construction zone, featured only a temporary barrier that Baker evidently failed to avoid. Local authorities soon classified the incident as misadventure, a verdict denoting an accident without evidence of intention or external cause. Though the coroner's final report remained largely out of the spotlight, this designation quelled deeper inquiries from law enforcement. Friends and co-workers, meanwhile, struggled to understand how a meticulous, forward-thinking individual could meet such a swift and violent end on an ostensibly familiar roadway. Some questioned whether the pressures of working on advanced defense communications had in any way distracted him. Others considered the possibility of poor signage or a sudden mechanical glitch. None of these theories garnered solid proof. The lack of skid marks, if indeed confirmed, hinted that Baker might not have even had time to brake. Observers found the entire scenario jarring, especially given that the stretch of road was not notorious for deadly accidents. Though Baker's story briefly surfaced in media examinations of mysterious or abrupt deaths among British defense workers, it never captured the level of attention that more sensational incidents did. Online forums later floated rumors that he had been involved in particularly sensitive data projects, but no official evidence surfaced. Plessy and the Ministry of Defense both refrained from commenting, leaving speculation to flicker and fade over time. For Baker's family and close associates, the official conclusion, an unfortunate driving mishap, offered little comfort. In the end, Michael Baker remains another name in the catalog of defense industry fatalities that simultaneously feel both ordinary and unfathomable. A brilliant mind, brimming with potential, lost to what authorities deemed a common accident. The absence of a fuller explanation underscores a troubling reality. Even those who thrive on complexity and precision may be undone by a single, unguarded moment on the road. By the time he reached 60, Frank Jennings had established himself as a seasoned electronic weapons engineer at Plessy, a linchpin in numerous defense projects. Calm and thorough, he was the kind of professional colleagues counted on to solve intricate technical problems, a fixture in an industry where meticulousness could mean the difference between success and failure. His sudden and unexpected death in June 1987, reportedly from a heart attack, came as a jolt to those accustomed to his steady presence. Accounts of Jennings's final day remain hazy. Some suggest he collapsed at or near his workplace, others believe it happened elsewhere. Regardless of location, the abruptness fueled uncertainty among those who knew him as someone who thrived in high-pressure settings. Under normal circumstances, a sudden, unexplained passing might warrant at least a cursory inquest, particularly given his role in a demanding field like defense engineering. Yet, no formal coroner's inquiry took place. In Britain, heart attacks aren't uncommon, but for a man still actively engaged in intricate electronics and weapons systems, many assumed a deeper look was inevitable. Explanations for the missing inquest vary. Perhaps medical history painted an unequivocal picture of natural causes, or perhaps his family and the authorities saw no basis to suspect foul play. Some quietly speculate about workplace discretion or an effort to avoid entangling sensitive mod-related information in a public proceeding, though there's no direct evidence to confirm such a scenario. With no inquest and scant media interest, Frank Jennings's death slipped into the background of defense industry lore. A few co-workers expressed lingering doubts. How could an engineer so adept at managing stress simply drop dead without warning? Others, acknowledging his age and the inherent pressure of his responsibilities, see it as a tragic but unsurprising possibility. Absent a legal or public inquiry, the event offered no revelations, no hidden truths about his time at Plessy or the cause of his heart attack. Jennings left behind the memory of a dedicated figure who navigated an opaque world of top-secret tasks with reliable competence. For those who worked alongside him, that steady diligence remains his legacy. no definitive narrative emerged to explain his final moments, allowing rumors and guesses to fill the void. In the end, his colleagues and family were left to mark his passing with private grief and subdued speculation, aware that in a field rife with security protocols and tight-lipped practices, some stories simply end in silence. At just 23 years old, Russell Smith was already making his mark as a lab technician at the Atomic Energy Research Establishment, AERE, a hub where nuclear and atomic energy projects often overlapped with British defense interests. Quietly diligent, he managed specialized lab tasks, maintaining equipment, organizing data, preparing samples, and exhibited a curiosity well suited to the rigors of high-stakes research. Friends recall him as even-tempered and modest, a young professional who rarely spoke of grand career ambitions yet showed all the signs of future success. In January 1988, however, Smith's trajectory took a sudden turn. He was found partway down a cliff in Cornwall, his body battered as though from a significant fall onto unforgiving rocks. Investigators concluded that he had either leapt or lost his footing, and the coroner ultimately ruled side. But for those who knew him, the verdict felt incongruous. Cornwall's coastal paths can be treacherous, particularly during winter, prone to slippery ground and gusting winds that can catch a person off guard. Smith had given no outward indication of despair or intent to harm himself. The idea that he would drive all the way to a remote cliff just to end his life struck many as baffling. The official inquiry provided little room for other interpretations. With no footprints to suggest a struggle or a secondary figure, and no note or obvious sign of foul play, investigators closed the case quickly. Yet in the context of Britain's 1980s defense and research communities, where abrupt or violent ends seemed all too frequent, Smith's death raised uneasy echoes. Some wondered if the pressures of his work at EAR, or of personal troubles never voiced, could have nudged him toward a tragic impulse. Others argued it was all too possible that a lone figure on a windy cliff face might simply slip, transforming a scenic walk into calamity. Because the coroner's conclusion was firm, Cornwall authorities saw little reason to prolong the inquiry, and local media coverage soon waned. Smith's family and co-workers found themselves wrestling with questions that no subsequent investigation would address. Did an unspoken worry drive him to that lonely promontory? Could an ordinary misstep have been misread as an act of desperation? In the absence of further evidence, the official record stands uncontested, but private doubts persist. For those who remain unconvinced, Russell Smith serves as a reminder of how quickly a promising future can dissolve into a swirl of ambiguity. Whether it was a final, deliberate choice or a tragic accident on Cornwall's rugged cliffs, his death highlights the uneasy intersection between scientific vocations, personal burdens, and the inscrutability of a single defining moment. Ultimately, Smith's story lingers as both a poignant testament to the fragility of life and a sobering meditation on how limited evidence can fix a tragic narrative in place, despite the many questions left hovering beneath the surface. Trevor Knight, a 52-year-old computer engineer at Marconi Space and Defense Systems, had spent decades refining the software and system designs crucial to high-level defense projects. By reputation, he was meticulous, a solver of complex engineering puzzles who preferred the structured challenge of intricate code over the glow of public recognition. In March 1988, however, Knight's quiet reliability ended under circumstances that would both shock his colleagues and feed the already rumored pattern of mysterious Marconi deaths. When local authorities discovered Knight dead in his parked car, they found a hose extending from the exhaust pipe into the sealed cabin, a setup that swiftly filled the interior with lethal carbon monoxide. There were no signs of forced entry or involvement by a second party. Investigators, faced with what appeared to be a carefully staged act, ruled the death aside. Those who knew Knight only through his calm professionalism struggled to reconcile his measured personality with the finality of this self-inflicted method. No side note or prior warning emerged, leading some to question what hidden pressures might have silently mounted until he saw no other solution. Knight's name soon slipped into lists compiled by media outlets on Marconi-linked fatalities. By this point, observers, particularly those inclined to conspiracies, were already noting the violent or puzzling ways in which a number of Marconi staff had died throughout the 1980s. Though the coroner's verdict in Knight's case was unequivocal and no direct evidence suggested foul play, the timing and method of his departure reinforced a sense of collective unease. Could high-stakes defense work, bound by confidentiality and strict deadlines, have contributed to a private despair? Or did Night harbor personal burdens that never showed at the office? With the coroner's ruling came the official close of the investigation. Marconi, for its part, made no extensive comment, seeing the event as a personal tragedy rather than a symptom of systemic issues. This stance left families and acquaintances to grapple with lingering questions. Why would a meticulous professional, well-versed in solving problems systematically, choose such a devastating end with no clear outward sign of distress? In the aftermath, Trevor Knight became another symbol in the litany of defense industry deaths, one more bright mind whose life ended abruptly, fueling speculation and sorrow in equal measure. Whether his final act stemmed from unseen psychological strain, an unspeakable personal crisis, or any number of hidden struggles remains an uncomfortable unknown. For those who remember him, the real tragedy lies in that gap between an expert's steady public facade and the profound, uncharted depths of private anguish that no one recognized in time. By the time John Ferry reached 60, he had navigated a long and successful path as an assistant marketing director at Marconi. His talent lay in translating complex defense sector products, encompassing radar, electronics, and communications technologies, into tangible solutions that won over high-level clients. Though he lacked the engineering pedigree of some Marconi employees, Ferry still possessed a sharp understanding of the firm's sophisticated offerings, coupled with the discretion required by a business steeped in confidentiality. Colleagues described him as polished, circumspect, and adept at bridging the chasm between deep technical jargon and the real-world demands of government and industry buyers. In August 1988, however, Ferry's distinguished career concluded under appalling circumstances. He was found dead in a company-owned apartment, an electrical cord plugged into a nearby outlet and the stripped leads placed in his mouth. Investigators at the scene reported no sign of forced entry or signs of a violent struggle, yet the method of his death, a direct electrocution, was so rare and disturbing that no single explanation seemed to fit. Was it a tragic act of self-harm? Had an accidental DIY repair venture spiraled out of control? Or might someone else have orchestrated the macabre tableau? As local authorities weighed these possibilities, hints emerged that foul play had not been ruled out. Unlike more common methods of side, electrocution is both painful and fraught with uncertainty, prompting skeptics to wonder why a measured corporate figure like Ferry would choose it. Others pointed out that he occupied a sensitive role at Marconi, with knowledge that could potentially attract the wrong kind of attention, whether industrial espionage, blackmail, or other covert threats. Still, lacking concrete evidence of homicide, no footprints, no clear signs of a staged scene, police had no grounds for a definitive accusation. Within Marconi's community, shock and confusion lingered. Few saw Ferry as the type to harbor secret despair, and the bizarre nature of his death fueled ongoing speculation. Some floated the notion that he may have tried to repair faulty wiring and wound up electrocuting himself, but the fact that the wire's leads were placed in his mouth undermined the idea of a simple mishap. Others alluded to disturbing conspiracies, yet no proof has ever surfaced to support any sinister plot. Official investigations remain tight-lipped, concluding no final cause beyond the chilling facts of the scene. For those who knew John Ferry, the suddenness and peculiarity of his end left deep unease. A once reliable marketing director, adept at handling demanding clients and tight-lipped contracts, was discovered in a position that no one had imagined possible. Though officially unclassified as either murder or side, the shocking scenario underscores a troubling truth. Even the most worldly, professionally skilled individuals can meet an incomprehensible fate, one that continues to haunt the archives of Marconi-related incidents and reminds us how tenuous our grasp on certainty can be. On a warm and unhurried Sunday in August 1988, 50-year-old aerospace engineer Alistair Beckham dropped his wife off at work before returning to their peaceful home in the English countryside. By all accounts, the day promised nothing more than a quiet afternoon. Beckham had built a solid career designing computer software for naval defense systems, a steady professional record that led him to contribute to America's Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, the Star Wars program at the cutting edge of military tech. Yet within hours, his life would end in a manner that no one who knew him could have anticipated. After parking his car, Beckham strolled through his neat garden to a weathered toolshed. Behind that closed door, amid a musty odor of old wood and engine oil, he performed the unthinkable. Sitting on a low box near the entrance, he looped exposed electrical wires around his chest and plugged them into a socket. Moments later, With a handkerchief clenched between his teeth, he flicked the switch. The jolt killed him instantly, adding his name to a disturbing roster of British defense experts who had died under bizarre or violent conditions since 1982. As with the others in that grim tally, many tied to SDI research, Beckham showed no clear sign of suicidal intent. His colleagues, friends, and family found themselves confronting an inexplicable tragedy. The government maintained these incidents were unconnected, offering coincidence as the likeliest explanation for the pattern of sudden deaths. Newspapers pointed to stress as a possible culprit, noting the punishing demands of high-level defense work. Yet speculation of espionage, contract fraud, or an orchestrated conspiracy quickly swirled, powered in part by Cold War anxieties and the hush that surrounded so many aspects of SDI. In the wake of the tragedy, Beckham's widow, Mary, categorically rejected the conclusion that her husband had intentionally ended his life. "We had a very good relationship," she insisted. "He wouldn't go out to that shed, not by choice." Echoing the sentiments of other bereaved relatives, Mary questioned how a seemingly well-adjusted professional, valued for his brilliance and expertise, could meet such a violent end. The swirl of unanswered questions was only heightened by the silence that often followed inquiries into SDI-linked projects. As the years passed, Beckham's death became one more link in the chain of puzzling incidents tied to Britain's defense community, a chain that many believed could not be attributed solely to random chance. Officials, for their part, offered the same reassurances repeated after each new tragedy. Yet Mary had to confront the reality of losing her husband under circumstances so inexplicable that no official statement could truly lessen her grief. To this day, Alistair Beckham's name remains wedged uncomfortably between official disclaimers and whispered theories. In the quiet of that family garden, with the toolshed still standing, his story endures as a testament to the possibility that even a competent, highly respected engineer can step beyond the boundaries of everyday routine, into a place so dark and baffling that neither loved ones nor investigators ever fully grasp why. By the autumn of 1988, Andrew Hall had already gained a reputation as an astute engineering manager at British Aerospace. In his early 30s, he was lauded for his methodical approach and clear passion for progressive aerospace projects, managing design teams and coordinating significant undertakings with notable poise. Colleagues and friends alike described him as both social and forward-looking, the kind of person who balanced professional aspirations with an affable, easygoing demeanor in everyday life. It came as a staggering blow, then, when Hall was found dead in his car, the cause of death unmistakably carbon monoxide poisoning. Investigators discovered a hose connected to the car's exhaust pipe, channeling fumes into the enclosed interior. Parked in a secluded area, the vehicle offered no sign of foul play or physical struggle. The coroner soon labeled the incident aside, citing the deliberate arrangement of the exhaust hose as strong evidence of intent. For those who knew him, however, nothing about Hall's circumstances suggested despair. His career at British Aerospace, one of the era's key defense contractors, was flourishing. He actively engaged in office social functions and kept up spirited conversations about future travel and professional growth. Close friends agreed that Andrew had everything to live for, leaving them stunned by the coroner's straightforward verdict. The method, while tragically common in certain side cases, clashed with the confident, personable man they were used to seeing. In the weeks that followed, many struggled to reconcile Hall's seemingly positive outlook with the reality of his final act. Some speculated about hidden pressure, a silent burden behind the success. Others stood by the official ruling, believing that no outward sign could fully reflect an inner battle that may have remained undetected. With no contradictory evidence or reopened investigation, there was little room to challenge the conclusion. Ultimately, Andrew Hall joined a growing roster of talented individuals in Britain's 1980s defense industry whose deaths arrived without warning. Though the official narrative pointed to personal despair, friends found it difficult to match that explanation with their memories of a confident, future-facing colleague. As with so many such losses, it highlights the fact that a polished surface can conceal deep turbulence, and that even those who appear to have every reason to thrive can encounter a darkness invisible to the world around them. From 1982 to 1989, 22 men, each a respected figure in Britain's defense or research sectors, lost their lives under circumstances that defied ordinary explanation. Many held top-tier positions, others were brilliant up-and-comers, and most were well-liked family men who gave little hint of impending tragedy. Yet the details surrounding these fatalities, Once pieced together, read like n/x/file of unsolved or dismissively closed cases, exploding vehicles, noose like ropes tied. I found much of the information had been buried by decades of silence, blurred by conflicting reports, or simply never documented. Rumors of espionage, hush-hush defense contracts, and hidden pressures linger on the edges. Friends and family recall no signs of despair. The official records chalk up ending their own lives, fewer, to reflect on the possibilities. Perhaps each tragedy was an isolated flash of personal hardship or miscalculation. Or perhaps, behind the hush of national security, a single thread ties them. Who knows? Maybe in a future investigation, that answer will surface. We should seek the light, seek the truth.